देखन सरिया करे तो खाएंगे मोबाइलवा जुतवा एक सीजन के हमारे सब चीज है वो जुतवा दलील
Please mute everyone.
लॉर्ड कृष्णा हजारीबाग अमृतनगर ना हो पथवा निकाल दिलो पता पूरा
Ritlal ji, please mute yourself. Ritlal ji, please mute yourself.
ठीक है म्यूट कर
.30 we had completed. Boys were also playing too much.
Hello, please mute all of the participants. Please mute. धर्मेंद्र सर को हम ज्वाइन करा रहे हैं all other participant.
मसालों का लेकिन सही था ना ज्यादा तीखा
सर जिनका म्यूट नहीं होगा प्लीज आप उनको रिमूव कर दें. भरत सर हेलो. Sir, those who have not muted themselves, please remove them.
Okay. That's I'm trying.
Walaikum.
समय तो कौन देगा चंपा का नहीं हुआ तो आपको लास्ट चैप्टर बहुत लंबा है वो नहीं. Wait. Good afternoon everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. So today's topic is setting learning outcome in teaching learning. This beautiful topic. 15 minutes I will join and best Alok Kumar Sinha ji. So you go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Continue.
Okay, thank you, sir. A very warm welcome and good afternoon to one and all, especially President and Vice President of Hazaribag Sahodaya School Complex and my principal sir also. I really feel obliged to get an opportunity to express myself on such a platform. Before starting the session, I request all of you to please mute yourself. So without further delay, I would like to come on my topic, and all of you know that today's topic is setting learning outcome in teaching learning process. So here the key word is learning outcomes, learning plus outcomes. So first we must know what is outcome. An outcome is the final result or consequence of an event. So first, let us understand with some well-known examples. I said well-known examples means all of you must know these type of examples. In mathematics, especially in probability, we always use these type of examples. Suppose if I throw a dice, then how many results we will get? So it is obvious that if we throw a dice, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So these 6 results are outcome, are called outcome. Again, suppose that if I toss the coin, then either head or tail will come. So getting head or tail is also called outcomes. So when outcomes is associated with learning, then it is called learning outcome. So these examples given by me, it is these outcomes obtained by performing an experiment. And the experiment is throwing a dice, tossing a coin. But in general, in learning outcome is final result of a course of action, we can say, after teaching or taking a class. Now we can understand it by practical examples. Suppose we taught addition or subtraction or money chapter in lower classes. We all know that in lower classes it has been taught that addition, subtraction, money, and suppose a student of that class goes in market for shopping, and if he or she calculate the transaction done by him, then we can say that his calculating ability of transaction with shopkeeper is outcome. If he is able to know what money he have to give, what money he have to receive, then these are outcomes. Outcomes of teaching addition, subtraction, or uh, lesson money. So learning outcome is focused point of learning process. So now in today's session, we will discuss the following points. What are goals? What are objectives? What are learning outcomes? Importance of learning outcomes for students, teachers, and institutions. How are learning outcomes written in the context of Bloom's taxonomy? And what are learning indicators? So we all know that every syllabus has 3 main components, that is goal, objectives, and learning outcomes. So let us see what do they mean and how they are different from each other. So the first one is goal. Goals are usually relating to the larger aims such as critical thinking, transfer of content, or creativity. And in objectives, it is laid out as a map of action we will need to achieve those goals, such as specific instructions, case studies analyzed, and text discussed. And the last one is learning outcomes. The learning outcomes are what learners actually produce. Student will be able to do because of the instructor analysis or discussion. So instructor assess students learning through these outcomes. It must be measurable and observable. So the key point in learning outcomes that it must be measurable and observable. So we can say in short, goals dictate the general aims of a course, project or activity, whereas objectives lay out the plan for how these goals will be met or what the instructor will, and learning outcome exhibit what the learners actually do after the end of activity. So as we know that learning outcome is the final result which we obtain after the end of activity. So objectives are intended when learning outcomes are what is actually achieved. So now we entered the topic learning outcomes. What are learning outcomes in details? Think first about what is essentials that students know or be able to do after the course of program, what students need to know and could make powerful use of to enhance their lives and more effectively contribute to society. We believe that such reflections will lead instructors to focus on a broad synthesis of abilities that combine knowledge, skills, and values into a whole that reflects how people really use knowledge. So finally, learning outcomes describes what students will learn in a class or in a class session. So moving from what I am going to teach today to what do I want students to learn today. So learning outcomes articulates what students are able to do after instructions and why students need to do this. This should be clear in mind before giving any instruction. So learning outcomes are statements that describes the knowledge or skills. Hello. So now we can differentiate learning outcomes versus learning objectives. So the distinctions between learning outcomes and learning objectives is not universally recognized, and many instructors may find that the term learning outcomes describes what they have already understood by the term learning objectives. Some scholars make no distinctions between the two terms. Those who do usually suggest that learning outcomes are a subset of type of learning objectives. So learning objectives, for example, may outline the material, the instructor intends to cover or the disciplinary questions the class will address. By contrast, learning outcomes should focus on what the student should know and realistically be able to do by the end of an assignment, activity, class, or course. So, I must tell that learning objectives are something which is related to future tense. The student will be able to, and the outcomes are something which is related to present tense. Suppose that if I make a student learn how to sing, then if we say he will sing, it is objective, learning objective. बट ही सिंग्स, वह गाना गाएगा, ये लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव है, लेकिन वह गाना गाता है, दिस इज कॉल्ड आउटकम्स. So learning outcomes must be written in present tense. So the same goals addressed by learning objectives can be equally addressed by learning outcomes, but by focusing on the application and integration of the course content from the perspective of the student, learning outcomes can more explicitly and directly address expectations for student learning. So it is associated with student expectations. So the next is why develop learning outcomes. So why we need to develop learning outcomes? So we see that it is equally benefited to all that is for students, teachers, and institutions. Learning outcome is not only for students. Learning outcome is not only for students. It is for students, teachers, and institutions also. Hello, please mute yourself. So first, let us see how it is benefited to students. By focusing on the application of knowledge and skills learned in a course and on the integration of knowledge and skills with other areas of their life, students are more connected to their learning and to material of the course. The emphasis on integration and generalizable skills helps students draw connections between courses and between coursework and other kinds of knowledge. So we must focus what content and material and knowledge is given to students so that they feel connected to learning process. So this is the most important thing for any learning outcome to be achievable. We must focus on the content and material knowledge given to the students. It is equally benefited for instructors or teachers also. The process of developing learning outcomes itself offers an opportunity for reflection on the content of the course in the context of its potential applications. Developing learning outcomes means that the context of the learning will always be emphasized and courses focus on the knowledge and skills that will be most valuable to the student now and in the future. Learning outcomes point to useful methods of assessment. Learning outcomes allows instructor to set the standards by which the success of the course will be evaluated. So learning outcome, we can say that it is effective tools for teachers to assess their students effectively, and with the help of these tools means learning outcomes, a teacher can evaluate their students. And now let us see how it is benefited for institutions and administrators. In order to determine what is essential for students to know, an instructor must consider the particular course or unit in the context of future coursework and the curriculum as a whole. This contributes to the development of a current curriculum within a decentralized institution while maintaining instructor autonomy and helps to ensure that students are prepared for future work and learning. Second thing is that the application of integration of learning emphasized by learning outcomes reflect the support the contemporary nature and priorities of the university, enhancing university or any institution, enhancing student engagement, uncovering opportunities for interdisciplinary and providing guidance and support for students with many different kinds of previous academic preparation. And third one is learning outcomes provide structures from which course and programs can be evaluated and can assist in program and curricular design, identify gap or overlap in program offerings, and clarify instructional, programmatic, and institutional priorities. So this is these learning outcomes is important for institution, and all we know that the first preference of people is that institution who has high learning outcomes. So it is equally benefited for all three, that is student, teachers, and institutions. So after knowing, we must set learning outcomes. So let us see design course. So for achieving any learning outcome, we must design our course or our lesson plan so that students may get more learning outcome. So outcomes must clear that what is students know and be able to do after completion of course or value as a result of taking a course or completing a program. So it decides the student's mentality that is that course or lesson plan is value as a result of taking a course or completing a program, also called backward course design. So learning outcomes often take this form. As a result of participating in program course name, you means students will be able to action verb, many action verbs we will see in Bloom's taxonomy, learning statement. Use your learning outcomes as a tool. Let them inform your choice of teaching strategies, course activities, and assessment. So students must know first your teaching strategies, your course activities, and assessment. So clearly identified learning outcomes allow instructors to make hard decisions about selecting course content, design assessments that allow students to demonstrate their knowledge and skills. It helps in designing teaching strategies or learning activities that will help students develop their knowledge and skills, measures students' learning accurately and effectively. So having access to articulate learning outcomes in a syllabus, for example, helps students decide if the course is a good fit or their academic trajectory, identify what they need to do to be successful in the course, take ownership of their progress, and be mindful of what they are learning. So these are the parameters for designing course to achieve learning outcomes. So getting started with setting learning outcomes. First, we need to ask yourself what the most important things a student should know. Be able to do means skills or value effective after completing the course program. Consult a list of actions verbs, which are verbs that result in overt behavior or products that can be observed and measured. So Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives provides some useful verbs to write objectives for different level of learning. And for making learning outcomes or writing learning outcomes, we must avoid verbs. Remember, then he can enlist the things, he can define the things. In second, that is second, classify. Classify comes under understanding, because if he understand the things, he can classify the resources. Demonstrate, it comes under application. If if he know how to apply the things, he can demonstrate. Compare, it comes in analyze. And value and enlist, it comes in evaluate, because if he want to evaluate, then he must be know how the values and enlist. And to create a web chart comes in create. So all these questions are based on Bloom's taxonomy. It satisfies the all the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So when we want to achieve learning outcomes, we must prepare a questionnaire of that lessons so that learning outcomes can be achieved. So finally, learning outcomes review checklist. Learning outcomes communicate to students what they will know or be able to do by the end of your module, class, course, or program of study. Many practitioners use the acronym SMART to determine whether or not they have written effectively learning outcomes that are specific, measurable, aligned, realistic, or relevant, and time bound. So the full meaning of SMART, it is specific. M stands for measurable, A stands for aligned, R stands for realistic, or you can say relevant, and T for time bound. So these are the properties of outcomes or review checklist. Now, the following questions will help you determine whether you have written an effective learning outcome or not. So, if you want to check, so the checklist is the outcome specific? Is the outcome measurable or observable? Is the outcome aligned with the broader outcomes for the course or program? Or is the outcome realistic and achievable for students? Is the outcome time bound? Does it identify a clear time frame or not for achievement? Like that, by the end of this course, students will be able to some benefits of learning outcomes. I have already discussed in earlier slides, so let us recapitalizing it again. So benefits of learning outcomes are select content, develop instructional strategies, develop and select instructional materials, construct tests and other instruments for assessing and evaluating. Improve the overall program. These are the benefits of learning outcomes. And its characteristics, we have just seen. Characteristics of good learning outcomes is SMART. S stands for specific, M stands for measurable, A stands for achievable, R stands for relevant or realistic, and T for time bound or timely. So clear to the students and instructor. Learning outcome must be clear to the student and instructor. Third one is integrated development, transferable, and fourth one is use discipline, specific competencies and standards. So in order to get to the uniqueness and real world application of the learning, use a variety of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, writing learning outcomes. How can we write learning outcomes? So, we must start with learning outcomes formula, good learning outcomes characteristics, Bloom's taxonomy. So, we must not forget the Bloom's taxonomy for achieving learning outcome in teaching learning process. Learning outcomes exercise for your session and write your learning outcomes. So 3 components of the smart learning outcomes. First one is performance. What should the learner be able to do as a result of learning? So performance is the key component of smart learning outcomes. Standards. How well should the learner be able to do it? What level of performance is required? It considers quality, quantity, efficiency, and accuracy. So all these constitute to standardize smart learning outcomes. And third one is conditions. Where and with what should learner be able to do? So it must be clear to them. So learning outcomes formula is time frame, student focus, action verb, product, process, outcomes. So with the help of this formula, you can write any learning outcome. Time frame, there must be time boundation. It must be student focused, and action verb must be used, and all the action verbs we will see in Bloom's taxonomy in further slide, and also we have seen it previously. And fourth one, the final outcome or product process. So using the formula time frame, at the end of the class, time frame must be clear at the end of the class, or at the end of the session, at the end of 2 period, 3rd period, it must be classified. Student focused. Students will be able to, after a course of action, it must be clear what students will be able to do. Action verb. There are so many action verbs. Here demonstrate is written. Product process. Proficiency within the laboratory by correct use of appropriate equipment. So when students goes in laboratory, it must be clear that correct use of appropriate equipment. For understanding anything, it is required. Next example is that we can frame the time as after completing the online tutorial session, or student focused students will be able to so in Bloom's taxonomy, we have already seen that uh, first one is knowledge, second is comprehension, third one is application, fourth one is analysis, fifth one is synthesis, and sixth one is evaluation or to create. So we must follow Bloom's taxonomy for writing any learning outcomes. Now we see the Bloom's level, lowest to highest. So first one is knowledge or remembering. Second one is comprehension, understanding, application, applying. Fourth one is analysis or analyzing the things. And fifth one is synthesis or creating, and evaluation or evaluating. So starting with lower levels, knowledge or remembering. Recalling previously learned information such as facts, terminology, rules. So recalling anything comes under knowledge, remembering, may be memorized or understanding. So in this, the descriptions are ability to do, understand, and interpret learned information. So when we interpret the things or to understand, so these ability are comes in comprehension or understanding the things. Answer must be in the student's own word while still using terminology appropriate to the course material. And action verbs used in it is explain, summarize, distinguish between, restate, classify, describe, discuss, explain, express, interpret, contrast, predict, associate, estimate, differentiate, discuss, extend, translate, review, restate, locate, recognize, report. So there are so many action verbs. And from these action verbs, we can frame our question, or we can create our questions to review how learning outcomes will be achievable. Third one is application or applying. So it requires to put concepts or ideas to work in a new situation or solving a new problem. So all the three labels which discussed earlier can be applied in this segment. If you know that, then you can apply the things. And may require identifying or generating examples not found in assigned materials. So that key points which are not found in assigned material, it may require to identify or generating examples. And the action verbs which is present in this level are demonstrate, relate, apply, choose, demonstrate, arrange, dramatize, employ, illustrate, interpret, operate, practice, schedule, sketch, solve, use, calculate, complete, show, examine, modify, change, experiment, and discover. So there are so many action verbs in this Bloom's higher level also under the application or applying the things. Now, analyze or analyzing. So in this segment, the ability to break material down into its component parts and to understand its underlying structure. It means we can break down the information into the some or many pieces. So an information can be broken into some pieces, then it comes under analyze or analyzing the things. How can one analyze the things? So it requires students to identify logical errors or to differentiate among facts, opinions, assumptions, hypotheses, and conclusions. If he can analyze the things, he can require students differentiate among facts, opinions, assumptions, and expected to draw relationship between ideas. He can draw a relationship between ideas, between different type of ideas, and action verbs estimate, diagram, analyze, appraise, calculate, categorize, compare, contrast, criticize, differentiate, discriminate, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, test, separate, order, connect, classify, arrange, divide. So these are the action verbs we can use for creating the questions. And last one is synthesis or creating, and it is opposite of analyze. Ability to use creativity to compose and design something original. After successful completion of a course, if one can create or produce anything, so these actions or these performance are under synthesis or creating. So ability to use creativity to compose and design something original, solve some unfamiliar problem in a unique way. It also comes under synthesis, and the action verbs used in it are combine, create, arrange, assemble, collect, compose, construct, create, design, develop, formulate, manage, organize, plan, prepare, purpose, set up, rewrite, integrate, design, generalize. So these are the action verbs under this segment. And evaluation or evaluating. Ability to evaluate a total situation, to judge the value of information based on defined fixed criteria. And the most important part of the answer is the justification and rationale for the conclusion. So action verb present in it are judge, critique, justify, discriminate, apprise, argue, assess, attach, defend, predict, rate, support, evaluate, recommend, convenience, judge, conclude, compare, and summarize. So these are the some examples based on knowledge, comprehension. These are also discussed in earlier slide. Focused on students, use action verbs. We have learned so many action verbs in Bloom's taxonomy. Names of product or process, measurable or observable. It is learning outcomes must be measurable and observable. Prompts, a measure or method, will be useful for you to assess. So these are the checklist. assessment methods. So assessment methods, we all know pre-post test evaluation, student interviews, minor paper, exercise, or standardized published test instruments. Using assessment information, rewrite learning outcomes, identify problem area, change what you do and how you reach. So these are the things which can be used in using assessments. Discuss with colleague and faculty. We can discuss the problem with our colleagues and faculty to betterment for how to achieve learning outcomes. Revise assessment methods. Now, learning outcomes as a basis of designing course. So, 5 questions for design a course. What do you want the student to be able to do? This is outcome. What does the student need to know in order to do this well?
Excuse me, sir. Please, sir. Link send me, sir.
Hello.
Sir, please, sir. Send me link, sir.
Link is already sent. Bharat sir has already sent it in the group.
Your copy.
And third, what activity will facilitate the learning? It comes under pedagogy. And how will the students demonstrate the learning? How will I know the student has done this well? So these are the 5 questions for designing a course to achieve maximum learning outcomes. And our motto is that. So linking of learning outcomes, teaching and learning activities. So in short, if the learning outcomes are clearly written, the assessment is quite easy to plan. If you want to assess the things, you must write clearly learning outcomes. So learning outcomes for 2 days is at the end of this class, none will be able to describe what is meant by the learning outcome, discuss Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, and apply Bloom's taxonomy to help you to write some learning outcomes. And fourth one is that discuss the linking of learning outcomes to teaching and learning activities and assessment. So thank you all. I think Bharat sir has
Excuse me,
sent
sir.
statement.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, yes, sir.
Will you please clear the third question in the assessment?
Third question in the assessment.
Yes, sir. Which of the following outcome verb has the highest level according to the revised Bloom's taxonomy?
Let me see.
Your options are evaluate, reflect, create, apply.
सर लिंक कहाँ पर मिल रहा है?
Link is present in the chat box.
Link is present in chat box.
Sir, which of the following outcome verb has the highest level according to the revised Bloom's taxonomy? The options are evaluate, reflect, create, apply.
सर लिंक कहाँ पर है?
लिंक
सर लिंक चैट बॉक्स में ऑलरेडी है.
सर हम लैपटॉप से कर रहे हैं, पता नहीं लग रहा है लैपटॉप.
लेट मी चेक. लिंक वाज गिवन.
जनरली चैट में रहता था.
हाँ, जनरली
चैट में ही है, चैट में ही है.
तो सर चैट में तो हम देख रहे हैं, नहीं नजर आ रहा है.
नहीं, हम लोग तो चैट से ही लिए है ना अभी भी. आप
लैपटॉप से हम पहली बार खेल रहे हैं इसलिए.
आलोक सर, विल यू प्लीज.
ठीक है सर, हो गया.
ओके, आलोक सर.
यस सर.
Sir, can you explain the third one? It is which of the following outcomes verb has the highest level according to the revised Bloom's taxonomy?
Options are, sir?
Options are evaluate, reflect, create, apply.
Highest. We have just in create. This create.
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 Okay, sir. Thank you.
Alok, Kumar, Sinha. Seeking learning outcome. Learning outcome in teaching, learning, excellence.